Alright, 저기 제법부에다 차츠 유유delaya 지게 지딩이 감기 두기 장난년 비게 아니 상계 신감이 받지 된 상계 콜이야 제주스마 빠도메 봐요 봐지 랑기 되니야 원숨도 유에서 비게 되면 봐지 되네 랑기 류 아니 지게 빠도메 봐주 안 되네기 류 빠도메 봐주야다 이 요건에 아니 된기 당한 지게 사타셰비게 상계다 진짜 받은 구성도 유인데 제주도 전에 대라야 대바 제주 제바다 대답이 연대지 능해야 토바쇼 선비게 되면 받지 되네는 저되네 물리기고네 차세야다 나기고네 되바돼야 되는 소식이 예 그제 최비 유제메도다 두별라 소바나 소바도 부보래 세지 어도 지나가 저기 디리 쇼웨디 이거라 가산다 디리 쇼웨디 이거 마시 서와다.
Good afternoon. So last night and today we've started to look at the 7 limb practice. And of the 7, we've looked at the first 2. And to present them in brief, prior to one engaging in the 7 limb practice, one has generated a motivation of bodhicitta and refuge and visualized before one the merit fields. Here now, in the start of the 7 limb practice, one specifically calls to mind innumerable Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And in brief, one imagines on every atom a Buddha surrounded by Bodhisattvas within that Buddha's Pure Land. So before one imagines innumerable Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And one doesn't merely call them to mind, but one also calls to mind their remarkable qualities, leading in dependence on prior study and reflection, leading in dependence on that to the generation of both faith in their great qualities, as well as aspiration to develop them oneself so as to fulfill one's bodhisattva intention. And then one engages in prostrations through imagining countless bodies of oneself, prostrating together physically, as well as reciting praises to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and with an understanding of emptiness too. In this way, one prostrates with body, speech, and mind. And thereafter, one makes offerings to the same objects, or the same beings, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and they are the 2 divisions of offerings, surpassable and unsurpassable. So that in brief is what we looked at last night and this morning. Solambada Dizu Konzu Pia Chobadi, Angelana Yoba Charuba, di Gong Cabra di Yoruba, Janjus Papa, Janjusimbi Pabigi, and Dingis into you to be Cheba Chibi Yeti, Janjusima Solambala, Dinajomaro. Is that Janjusimbi Solambi Puegi Cheba Yeti, Lana Yoba Charuba. Lana Yoba Che, Lana Yoba di Galia, Cabal Papa Puya Yoruba, Lana Yoba. 제자다 전주스면 파비 유기다 대서 내라나 매바 책으로 내 전주도 파바라 난선의 체배네 진짜 전주사 당본 이버 숨버시바 사고버 주바스네 디나네 서주바디 디난세 예와 체배네 서주비기 부예기 주비지 부예디다 라나 매바 책으로 디 오고 쳤는데 라나 예바 책으로라네. So a question has been asked, and that is, to rephrase it, the presentation of the difference between surpassable and unsurpassable offerings was made in between the bodhisattvas make offerings that are unsurpassable, whereas ordinary beings make offerings which are surpassable. And so therefore, that implies that the offerings of ordinary bodhisattvas and Arya bodhisattvas are both equally unsurpassable. So it was just asked, is that the case? And Geshe says no. So the general division between surpassable and unsurpassable is those beings with the powerful, those bodhisattvas. The usual division is those with powerful concentration. Their offerings are unsurpassable, whereas those without such concentration, it is surpassable. That being said, one could also make the division in between surpassable and unsurpassable, between Arya bodhisattvas and non-Arya bodhisattvas, in which case ordinary beings and ordinary bodhisattvas, their offerings would be considered surpassable, because the offerings of the Arya bodhisattvas do surpass theirs, and therefore would be unsurpassable. The offerings of the Arya bodhisattvas could be considered unsurpassable in relation to non-Arya bodhisattvas. And in fact, even amongst the Arya bodhisattvas, the bodhisattvas abiding on the varying 10 grounds, one could make a cutoff at any point and say, from this point, perhaps on the 10th ground bodhisattva, there is nothing greater than the 10th ground's bodhisattva's offering, so theirs are unsurpassable. And everyone below the 10th ground bodhisattva, their offerings are surpassable. So one can divide it in different ways. The general way it is divided, though, is between ordinary beings and bodhisattvas. Okay. And there was a second question.
So the second question just relates to the verse on verbal prostrations. So page 47 in the book, I'm not sure what it is in the other text, but Lama Tsongkhapa says, or what I heard Geshe explain was that already we've visualized many bodies, and each body has a head, and each body has a tongue. So therefore there are innumerable heads and innumerable tongues giving praise. But the wording here is, in the English, is that each body emanates innumerable heads, and each tongue, there's sort of like an emanation of tongues as well.
Sure.
So I'm just wondering about the Tibetan in that section, because Geshe's thing sounded clear, but I wasn't sure if this English translation goes a step further.
Sure. Let me just have a quick look. You care to come out today? Dini ezili inji kampuri achipinsa nazo kari makbeksa chaksa. Dini lurere la koe paktume pata koe rere la che paktume pa chuane. Dini koe cheli makbori.
Yuba sam tangore.
The translation is correct. Geshe did say that, but I didn't translate that, so that was my error. So the book is correct. Yeah, and Geshe, in his commentary, he gave it as written, but I didn't say that. Yeah. So that's where the error came in. Okay. Yeah, Damsha?
I just want to clarify. We seem to make offerings of fragrant flowers, fragrant incense. The aroma of the butter lamps. So are we actually offering the smell, and we're offering different sorts of smells?
Yeah, so it seems like that in those that you mentioned, the fragrance aspect is being emphasized. So is it really the fragrance that is being offered as opposed to what surrounds it, the flower itself or the incense itself or the flame itself?
Jishimba. Marme Pugorwa, Marme, Chime Pugorwada. The Chime Puyada, Meadow Puyada, Chasan Puyadi, Meadow Pugo, Chime Pugorwa, Puyarwa. This way, you di Kichu, Marme Kichu, that in the Bugi Kichu, 이제 말매 표도 표도 보기 뒤도 보고 봐다 보기 뒤도 소 보고 봐 말매에서도 왜도 보고 봐다 뒤지 가서 뒤서 봐.
So what is being offered is that the main substance, the flower, the incense, the butter lamp, but these, because one's offering the very best, they have specific wonderful features such as fragrance as well. So one would expect fragrance with incense, but some flowers are more fragrant than others, so this is being emphasized. And then similarly with the butter lamp, one really is offering light, but the offering is of the very best we can imagine, hence the aspect of our fragrance is brought into it here.
그냥서 마음에 처음 피디갑리네 처음 부여기 부세기 뇌디데 강야야 닝제고 아니 림보치를 리뷰 유디네 부여 삼다만고 저게 부여 기주 저 부여 조디 마음에 부여와 이내다 부여 뇌다 아니 저게 뇌기 린다다 되네게 강야야 삼다 부여네 직도 앞에 나가서 칼라 저기 지게 칼라베 강 신부지 주벌 조 칼라 지고 얼마도 플레 탈레디 디고 말아 이내 탈레디데 강인 제제 장마로지 내내질이야 루테나 거기 안에 지게 좀 미디 셈이야 근데 가나 채용고로 어디나시로 와다 저 마음이 피고할 때 마음이 피디가다 마음이 피디 안에 지게 강인 제제 닝제보다 루세 뇌다 닝제보 내내게 근데 지게 또 부여돼 삼다 저 마음이 피고할 때 현다디게 양라로 시작을 봐.
In a similar way with the butter lamp, what is really being offered is not so much the butter or the fragrance, but one is imagining these are of the best possible quality too, when it's really offering the light. But one could also offer the other aspects, such as the greatest quality butter and mixed with incense as well, so that it smells appealing. And likewise, when one offers, I think it was mentioned, light from jewels, something like that was mentioned. So here, again, this is just to show that one is offering light of a variety of sources, all of which are the very best possible. And we can also think when we offer food, generally food will be in a container of sorts, usually arranged on a plate. And we know we're offering the food, not really the plate. That being said, the plate would be clean, and the plate would be one that's attractive. So whilst it's a food offering, one would ensure that the vessel that is being offered into would be one that's attractive. So it's just really about from every aspect to make the offerings as wonderful as possible to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Okay. Andy?
With the mental prostration from last night, is it really just the veneration after you've done the thought of infinite atoms containing the infinite Buddhas surrounded by Bodhisattvas in the emptiness? Or do you, within the mental, do you also visualize your bodies physically doing it?
With the mental prostration, in addition to what was explained in the 4 lines of the verse, does one also imagine or visualize oneself prostrating as well? So is there an action, an aspect of that physical movement of prostration? In the mental prostration. Yeah, in the visualization.
그래서 심지 삼야들이 이게 자세오래. 구성 두개 연된 대바제디 대바제 디나시 톱나선배 삼로코로다 심지 자세오래. 대를 심지 자세입니다고. 니 대바들 와데 대바지주들이 연된 대바지주의 제야다. 아니 되네게 연된 내가인도 톱나선배 삼로다 생이기 자세한테 책으로 와데.
So the mental prostration is maybe you could express it as the mind of faith is rising, the mind of faith towards the qualities of the Buddha. And that mind of faith, or maybe we could even say that our reaction to that mind of faith, that itself is the prostration, for mental prostration. So just looking at the dictionary, so other words that are used will be, in addition or alternatively to prostrate, will be homage or salutation or reverence. So especially reverence works very well. So mental reverence, that works very well. Yeah.
And sorry.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Sure.
So with the speech verse, from what I understood, I just want to clarify, this verse as it's translated here is actually completely opposite from what you said. Because this thing about inexhaustible seas of praise, inexhaustible, if I'm right, that applies to the qualities of this. So they've sort of,
Yeah, so that what for us is the fourth line, inexhaustible seas of praise. The inexhaustible relates to the seas or the oceans, but that refers to the qualities. So it's the qualities of those to whom the prostrations are being offered. Those are inexhaustible. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that is. Yeah.
Just from my understanding, what is the intention of these offerings? Like, is it to generate or invoke those qualities of both these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas before I go into meditation?
So was it the purpose of these offerings? Yeah? Is it to invoke these qualities before one goes into meditation?
가르치는 최부고 수능 사역에 된다고 하지. 가지래 만주 삼로디 지게 수능 사시데 개와서 지금 섬도 야게 돼야 된다서 그러. 제가 디니게 삼다시 최부부이나 수술을 수능 사고로 수능 사바이나 근데 수능 사바이나 지도다 개와를 좀 망부 사고로 봐. 개와지 망부시 사는데 곰 잡아이나 디기 슈긴기 긴기 가서 곰디 뉴버디 레라 용도 거봐. 지나데 디니기 기 가야 매바제 코론 곰자냥 찍부라 잡되베네 디기 네 똑바게 망와마 고려하다 안데 지기 계를 깔라카 용 거봐. 지디서 곧 개위 삼로 망부 진념도 여바네 디니기 안디 긴지 곰르게나 똑바게다 가르게네 레라 용 거래 제가 디르와. 제사당 중에 개와세디 삼로 나라야 베네 산지 구송도 연대된 대바지도 개바 코론 개와래 된 대바지도 별로 코론 개와래 다데니게 안주기 메도다 두보다 빼먹고치 찾아야 건조에 풀기에서 미야 풀기 메바지야디 삼로디안 개와라와 개와래 제사디 개와래 예 아니 데니게 안주기 류주권에도 전에 데니 군에 라지 류주권에 마차차디 류기 개와세 거래 데네 나게 칙 데니게 구송도 연대 된제 야 칙안에 결혼을 연대 데네도 데네 되봐 칙 줘야디 나게 개와래라고 지산 디스처상 개와래.
So in brief, the purpose of making offerings, as with these 7 limbs, is to accumulate, or with several of the 7 limbs, is to accumulate merit. And one's doing this in the preparation for the actual meditation. So for one's meditation to be successful, the success of one's meditation is greatly aided by the accumulation of merit and the purification of obstacles, because it's through a lack of merit that our meditation doesn't lead to transformation. Or it can be expressed as, due to many inner obstacles, our meditation doesn't lead to transformation. So therefore, to aid our upcoming meditation, which will be in the main part of this practice. Now we're in the preparation. One accumulates merit and then purifies as well beforehand. So this is why one prostrates, makes offerings. This accumulates merit. So then, what is merit or virtue? They're different Tibetan words, but same meaning, so I use them interchangeably. So then, what does it mean to talk about merit or virtue? It comes down to, it can be expressed through body, speech, or mind, but it is when the mind in particular, when the mind is particular, is virtuous. That is the accumulation of virtue. When the mind is non-virtuous, it's accumulation of non-virtue. So when one is recalling the many excellent qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind, faith is arising. That is the virtue. So that is how one creates virtue, by recalling the qualities of the Buddha, which is done before prostration and offering. Then, when one makes the offering, this is the mind of generosity. So you're giving, powered by one's faith, accompanied by the aspiration to develop those qualities. All of that together, these are virtuous minds, the faith, the aspiration, and the mind of generosity. These all lead to the accumulation of virtue. So we're strengthening our virtuous minds. And likewise with speech, with the recitation of words, but the mind is on the meaning of the word. So therefore, virtue is being accumulated by that recitation. And likewise with prostrations, because the mind should be engaged with the physical aspect of prostration too. And this all leads to the accumulation of virtue, sometimes via the body, via the speech, or solely mental. And then when one later comes to meditate, our habituation to virtuous minds is powered, is strengthened. And that's how it aids our later meditation. Okay?
Guanzhou Sumgi, and the Gabu Namki, Yuan Tela Deva Zishi, Chidi, Yuan de Tomnas, Mabachi, the Gawarwa, the Docho de Kare, Yuan de Majemba, Yuan de Delia, Tongchon Dayada, and the Chikpa, Tongchon Daya, Mai, Yuan de Majemba, the Yellow, the Yedang and Zuge, Docho, Yomo Birik Chagoro, Jezadi, Manzuge, Deva, and the Chik. Manzuke Jie Jin Madeba and Jiki Lelo Lungurwa. Just a Denigi, Desupa Gaya Lea, and Yuan Debache, Debaki, and Debaki, and T Yuan Denga, Toku, Topnas and Big, Deni Dumbaki, Disuki, Deji Dea, Yamlenjig, Lelo Samlodi, Gardore, Lelo Gagore, and Denigi. And the garrison Leloka, the nigger Tomnas and Don't you do you so Junju Kigore? She's not Junju said the thing as a Gawa Chagurua. She's a dang to meadow down to board the bed, but Mara the nigger, you hear some jet in the Merbaji, Pubig some tadu, Azulia, Chick Sena Session, Sena, Sosugi Sena, Sosugi, Sosu Nuba, the Shitang, Chichan, Pemberton, Nuba Yena, Shalia, Chick, Temato, so. Bed Sosu Yomobe, Chape Wonga dozen, Damzi Shuchi, just send us over. Says a don't somebody didn't do in the pre sometime, John de Gala, the nigger send us some of the shoe chung to water. And then I see that the Chike, Debakia, the chicken Yomobe, Dojo, the nigger and the nigger Ganga, some no Ganga Mazemba, Dushin, then the Dandu Langache, the Chik, and the Anzuki Sebiki, Doksho, because Museo Badikagore, that DJ to Samaragan, Kalakasang, Yosamara, some of my Chioro, Adipa, Doksho de Gagore, says that Dinigi, Doksho, Senada, and the Kasure, Lelo, and the Chi, Yendela Madebe, Samlo, and the Anchike, Yende, Yamne, two Niji, two Mares and Bigatangi, Young Mares and Samlo Shumbadi, or this Chaza, and Ma Shuchun by Dango, what is.
To talk further then about virtue and non-virtue, or merit and non-meritorious, if we recall the qualities of the Buddha, and with this comes minds such as faith or aspiration to develop them, faith in that, trust in these remarkable beings, or in these remarkable beings. This is virtuous, this mind, and the aspiration to become like that. This too is virtuous. But if one thinks of the qualities of the Buddha, and one's mind doesn't become virtuous but non-virtuous or afflicted, then one is going to criticize and find fault and think in this way. So from the same object, one could have a very different reaction. And then one is saying, or criticizing in whatever way. So this then is clearly non-virtuous. And between these two, faith and aspiration and criticism, it's clear which will serve to aid our meditation and which will serve to hinder our meditation. And also, these two minds are contrary. One's not going to have both, but one will overpower the other. And where this is of great importance is, for example, when with recalling the qualities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and faith and aspiration to develop those arise. That aspiration is we can call joyous perseverance, because with this aspiration comes the wish to engage, and that overcomes laziness, the opposite mind. Similarly, in the practice of offering, this is the mind of generosity, of giving of oneself. So here, this is a very broad training to freely give of oneself to ease the suffering of others, and it counters the opposite mind, the self-centered attitude of miserliness. And this we can understand. People who are naturally generous, their mind of miserliness will not be nearly as strong as someone who is known for being miserly. For them, generosity struggles to arise, because these minds are contrary. So by training in generosity, our miserliness is weakened in proportion to our strengthening generosity. And a final example would be that of patience. Patience is the mind that stays subdued in the face of adversity. So when one is encountering problems from outside or within, the mind stays undisturbed by those problems and can skillfully deal with them. The stronger one's patience, the weaker our impatience. And those who are very impatient, we know patience is a bit of a stranger to them. So this way, in meditation, as we cultivate the one, we weaken the contrary mind as well. So in this way, we can understand that patience is virtuous, and it aids our meditation. Impatience is non-virtuous, it's an afflicted type of mind, and that hinders our meditation.
아야, 나는 디바샤바디, 디바샤바 책거래. 나는 마치디디레 디바샤바니 되자 세단 세소 지직대에서 유두숨라 때네 시 류라서바 숨기 라신니 다게 기바데 대양 라신 랑규오소 제바다 현도 지도 현지도 주바 현예 제바라 예수 이랑와 오스 아니 대다 탐제 지르두바니 지치바 셰바데 대다게 니믹 제네 나마라 유진 치마라 담비 심기 닝타바네 샤나 나르치 폐와 체징 치마나 초체도스.
So let's turn to the text. So we're starting in the published book on page 48 and in the handout on page 54 with confession, the third of the 7 limbs. The confession of bad actions is set forth in the stanza. I confess each and every one of the negative actions I've done with my body, speech and mind, influenced by desire, hatred and ignorance. Depending on the cause, the 3 poisons, and by means of the 3 bases, body, speech and mind, the nature is that I have done them. That is, I have actually created them. I've made others create them, and I have rejoiced in those created by others, all of which is generally subsumed under I have done. If through recollecting their faults you regret those done previously and sincerely confess them with intention to abstain from them in the future, you stop the increase of deeds done in the past and stop committing them in the future.
That's the Geshe Thubten Rabten
Geshe just recited the verse, which I won't read again, but the line order, just so we know, is from the bottom to the top.
당한 저 녀모바사의 윤규 가서 디버사의 규디 송고 시고르와 제산 규디 가서네 텔레 규두 숨라 데니에서와 제산 규두 숨체데 두숨 되샤샤다 디모숨제 제산다 되샤샤다 디모고 원기 저게 샬레 네바체바다 샬리아 강아테야다 디버사의 규텔레드네 사고레 제르와 되샤샤다 디모 원게니 르다마다 디지 이기 강아세리 되샤게 원기 아니 디 류유고네 디버사야 가이고네 디버사 이유고네 디버사야 다 제단게 원기 시 원기 되네 류유고네 디버사야 가이고네 이유고네 디버사야 되네 디모고 원기 류유고네 디버사 가이고네 이기 디버사야디 제사 류가서 디버사야디 류가 이숨유고네 디버사야 숨 디마도 요말 디버사야디 제사 디사의 유디야다 되샤시다 디모숨 델레테네 디버사고레제 되샤시다 디모 원기니스리 아니 제 디버사의 윤규 되샤시다 디모숨데 용어송 류당하다 디시 이경 세르다 디버델이야 디비용어 디버가스네 류기 디바당하게 되베 이주권 디버사고레세 어데 윤규다 규 디버사의 규 되샤시다 디모숨제 니기 제부 디버델라 류기 디방하게 되베 이 디바세 숨데 고송고 직신이디.
Looking at the first two lines in Tibetan, which is the fourth and then the third line in English. The fourth line presents the cause for our accumulated non-virtue. We accumulate non-virtue by attachment, anger, and ignorance. These are the causes by which we accumulate non-virtue. Just to say as a translator, the word for attachment can be translated as desire. The word for hatred is the same as the word for anger. So these aren't different. This isn't different terminology, but this line then presents the cause by which we accumulate non-virtue, and then the means by which non-virtue is accumulated is in the third line, either through our physical behavior, our speech, or mentally.
Samlo nalia, Shenlia, Nube, Sampatan, Magawe, Samlo Gedu, the Samlo de Divada, Jig. And Jige, the new Kondo Gedu, Kondo Wangi, Jingani Pa, Shenlia, Tsubuta, Gunju, Dujala, Ding, Diva, Nagwan, Divasa, Chagore. Says that the new Kondo Shuchimacha, the Luyukon and Yedon Taya, Jiji, and that Luyukon Diva said, the Anzu, the Kondo Wangi, Diva Sayadi, the Lunga used to Diva Sada Beru in the Shirwa.
If anger or malice arises within us towards someone, that mind is non-virtuous. So the mere arisal and engagement with this affliction is non-virtuous. So that would be a mental non-virtue. So the cause would have been anger, and the means would have been the mind. And now non-virtue has been created by that mind. If that mind then is expressed verbally, perhaps through harsh speech or criticism, then in addition to mental non-virtue, verbal non-virtues are created. And then if one gets into a physical altercation, then a physical non-virtue, or non-virtue through the body, is also created.
Shengi Jalachi, Susu Delia, Shengi Jalachi, Chawaki, Chawaki Dingal, go with some Chawaki do, D. Wangeda, Chawadi Wangan, and Anzuki Kish, Shelia, Shen, the Kohorta, the Tichala Raya, Dundala Korea, Kohorta, Jun Sheda, the Sheva, and I go in Diva, with Duchagi Wangan, I go in Diva chair. Then Samnonalia, Tichala, the Mutiche, Sosola Rayagipa, to she Mutiche, Samnon, the Nelly you can divache. Then you can that jala to lenche and the trova, the lambalas to slamba in that you can divache. Just that any lunga yisum you can net your chawangi, lunga yisum with diva the patient which on the Danish Shavane Tikutua.
And similarly with attachment. So we take an illustration if you have attachment for someone else's possessions. And in particular, if this attachment is quite strong, it dominates the mind, there is already non-virtue accumulated. One now is attached to or desiring someone else's possession, not merely liking, but wanting it. Then if one acts under that influence, this mental non-virtue that's already created now is going to be compounded through perhaps one will talk to this person and try and deceive them, cheat them out of their possessions. So now in addition to mental non-virtue, one's creating a verbal non-virtue. And if one doesn't get, if one's devious speech isn't successful, then later one may try and steal what they have. And now one, in addition to mental non-virtue, is also creating non-virtue by physical means.
Dimu said you need to machine by the Dimu Chagro, machine by that been Jijena Gawad, Dipare said, needs to machine by chair, the Niki machine by the and Jinjene Gawad and Dipi Kabar machine by said Dimuche, machine with Jingi. Semchen Suna, Diku Yungu by the Debo Dunga Yungu, Mashibanza, Mombi, Momba Diwange, and Nazuki, Semchen, and the Chike, Semchen Juiche, Chike, Survina, Lukitiva Chagarwa, and then Yi Yukone, Musuche, Sueg, Suduki, Sambaro Shudi, Yikitiva Changunwa, then Nagukone, Delia, Bene, Chike. Then I go in the Shalia Tsuta, Junjo Shevala Sobada, Shevana, the young Agiti Chagua, just at the Mombi, Maribu, Mashibu, Yungurva. This is the Nigi, that Dushin and the Pero Shavana.
And the third one, that of ignorance. So, just first from my side, there are two words for ignorance. The word that is used here is timuk, and it's the word for that is the not knowing. So sometimes I translate this as confused ignorance, but it's where one is ignorant about something, one lacks knowledge, not the other word which refers to not knowing about reality. So this is the ignorance of not knowing, for example, about the law of cause and effect. Not knowing about the law of cause and effect, one will not know what is virtuous or non-virtuous. So one may even think that something that is fine to do, but actually it is non-virtuous. For example, killing. And one may well have thoughts about killing or have powerful thoughts of anger. And this is therefore non-virtuous. And this then can lead to being expressed perhaps through criticizing, or harsh speech, or perhaps in physical coarse behavior such as fighting or even killing. So not knowing about the law of karma, one will have thoughts which are non-virtuous, speech which is non-virtuous, and physical behavior which too is non-virtuous.
Dine zadi gyudu sumla dine sedu jiza gyudu yeche dine da shi sedu da divasayagi gyudu sumla dine ane shi lu la soba sum se lu shi lu da nga da yi ko ne ane sagyuras rashi ni adi adi lu gor ba ane gyudu sumla dine se jerum son chebedi gyusumla dine se de gyu de timosum de la dine ane dipa sago reshen dipa kane sago sene shi lu la soba sene lu da nga da yi ko ne sum yi ko ne sago re je da ranshin se di je ka so de she da timo wange ni lu da nga da di ji yi ki yang se de gi gyu da je bu che dine ranshin ne da gi dipa ki ba de su je sene Ranshin ni daagi ranshin sayade daagi tiba jiba sosuge jeba daagi jiba desu sosuge tiba jayade la sosuge jeba da rangi ngosu me jeba shenla jidu juba ane shengi jeba de la jesu iran jeba tiba sadhan de la da jiga sosuge lyunga ismi kode tiba sadhan manguswa jisa ranshin de daagi jiba de deyang sayade daagi jiba sayade deyang rangi ngosu jeba sedu sosuge lunga isumgo dibo ngosu jeba ta rangi ma jeba je shanla je tu chupa sada then Shengi Jebala, Jisu Iran Jebas, Jesa Dibusara de la Rangi Ungosu Jeba, Shen Jedu Rangos Majebaje, so Zama in Dodoje, the Shan Leche de Chupache, Tayaji, Shengi Jeba de la Jisu Iran Chen, Lusabana, Jesa Dibusata de la Lunga Yisumi going to Dibusata de Jungore, Sumudu.
Again, I was reading now through Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, just making this where it's clear, but our translation is fine throughout, so I'll just read that. Depending on the cause, the three poisons, so that's what we have in the fourth line, attachment, anger, and confused ignorance. And by means of the three bases, referring to body, speech, and mind, their nature is that I have done them, that is, that I have actually created them. So one has done it oneself, or one has made others do them, or one has rejoiced in others doing them. So as we have in the text.
Dishe de Tsijan, Diba Dagi Giba, Jishiba said, so what Tsijan, Chisan Diba Dagi Giba, said the Rangi Giba, also Giba, they Shen Jedu Juba, and Shen Giba Jisuira was said, this were Tsijik Donadire.
So this then fits with what we have in the verse. I confess each and every one of the negative actions I have done. So I have done refers to what we have here below, that I've done directly, or I have encouraged or made others do, or I have rejoiced in. So it's not merely or not only what I explicitly have done, but it includes what I have encouraged others to do and what I've rejoiced in that has been done.
That is chicken Chasan, Sebu Shirato Susugi, Bene Jekuma Guyare, Susugi, Soja Jabare, Dinik Dibango Suchiada, the Rangi Mosumajeba and the Michelia, Jekuran and Dinishus Passion, Jetu Juba, Jetu, Jangi, Jesavage, or the Yakut Jusha Disha says some Jesuira Jabana, the Jeke, Diora, Jeza, and Diningurvada, the Maja and the Chazan, Mammy the year. Mangus Yanjije, Dibongos Sagas, Chicos Chiguro, Chaval Masona. That area they could Pomboche, Chico, Padugo, Marcoron, Pachipa, John Shevels, Pachichuba, Chegurua. That didn't top someone that didn't go to Mamaji Tisha, top song, because the Meva Sesha Tisha and Beches Vira Chadugua, just the Denigi. And denying other Semja Sochi Balaya, Sosu Majeva Jeben, Mashandale, Sochi Jeju, and in Ungurwa, and the Mishandagi Jebache, Jesuit, the negative side, on the deeper side, the Rangi Rangi Musuch and Dipasa, or Yana Shenla Chiduch in Dipasa, Yana Shengi Jeba, that Jesuit, Rangi Maje, Shenla Jedu Majuba in a Shengi Jeba, how or Didisha and Big Jesuit and Shaban, the Antipachago, which is the Dipasada de la Disuma de Mary Danzule. Dipasa de Lujucone Saw and Agone Sawore, and Ijukone Sawore, Dinim Disumche, Dine and Made, that the Shenla Jedu Juba and Jesu Ira Chebadige, Ijukone Dipar Chagua, Ijukone Shenla Cheshus, Pagata. And the association you're going to Java del Chis or the Tisha Chisuranjana and the Tibacha, Ditchen. She's not the Dibasaya Diba Dire, Side Lunga Yusum Gona Sagores, Tezada Sabi, Judela Garios and Duxum Dire, Tesha Timosum Dire, and Dimado Dirwada.
Creating negativity either by doing it ourselves directly, or encouraging others, or making others do it, or rejoicing. It's important to be aware, to remain aware of these three different ways, and watch our minds, ensure we don't make such errors, because in the world this is very common. So for example, if we think of the concept of warfare, whilst on one hand, one could say very clearly, soldiers are killing, so soldiers are creating the karma of killing. But so too are the generals back in the headquarters on the comfy chairs. They are the ones sending the soldiers to kill. So they are also creating that karma of killing. And then the population rejoicing in their side's success is also creating non-virtue. And it's not just in the case of warfare, but in killing, which is perhaps a bit more familiar in our own society, say with hunting or with fishing. There is that which is done explicitly. Then one may encourage one's friend to come along and enjoy a day on the boat fishing, and the rejoicing in what your friend has caught. So in this way, one creates negativity through one's direct engagement as well as one's indirect engagement. And this is done, as we've seen, through the three means of physical behavior, verbal communication, and mentally. And other than through these three doors, there is no other means by which non-virtue is created. And then the cause that leads to non-virtue would be coming from these three poisons of confused ignorance, anger, and attachment.
Dida tamje dagi sosor sha sidun jesa denegi ngu nyomo dusumla dene lunga yisumyo kone dipa sa shebe dipa dige ane chige duschine samnadaje denegi an chige denegi dipa sa yo dige be notu chung sha di yawo mare notu sha de di dela dene nga chige lunga kasole dunga nyo ya gyure di dige minwa sambe samdaje dele ya ane chige gyoba di tigmyema sa shabaina dele ya gyoba ji tigminu sembege noju thwa che noju ima hakwa che on ne da da mong ba na zaw gi ne chi gi me sembege da domsim de ge domsim ge ne an de ne gi diba tham je ya de xin ha zhe xia yu de ya cho chi gya ba se dan je ba de de xi shu ge sam dang na na xin cho chi gya wa se dan je ba di shu ge sam dang na jiu ro sa da bia jiu ro de on de su yu dun le ya an ni ni ta ban pa xia gi sen be du xin sam da je sam da xia ye de la da di ba xia wa se ro wa na de da tam chi da ge so so xia de da tam chi da ge so so xia ha zai wi chi chi na de da tam chi da ge so so xia de da ma de wa ma je lo ai.
So the text we've just then commented on, all of which is generally subsumed under I have done. So these, now to continue to look at the verse, these negative actions that I have done, these are to be confessed in their entirety. So for us it's the first line. The entirety of faults that we can both recall having done, but no, as well as those that we imagine we would have done but forgotten, or perhaps in previous lives, all of these, knowing that these non-virtues are the causes that will lead to suffering, regret arises. So prior to confession, one needs to generate regret. One needs to see faults as faults. And then one confesses, and either before or after one includes with confessing that of restraint, where one makes the commitment, I will restrain myself from engaging in such physical, verbal, mental behavior. I'll restrain myself from coming under the influence of these afflictions, and I'll restrain myself from acting under their influence. And this then is confessed to the beings that we already imagined before us, these countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So this is now continuing in this third limb on what has been built previously, or imagined previously.
Da denegi shagi sembi samdaji da nganzuge de shaba ngosu da jige da dele ya nimbo topshi ko ni diwa shaba se ro da jisa da de dele de ngbo topshi ngosu de sungo ma de ne donda la nimbo topshi ko de cha de ko harsne diwa tamje da ge so so sha se de jisa diwa dige de de sa ge diwa di pa semle jemba che an je so da gyun yin ba no ru yin ba ha ko no ru re sha sem samda de ma ba na da di nimbo sun jin ba se ro de chin chin de zawo ge ne ji ge me sem be ge samda yin de ne don ba se don ba cha ge ro ane an ji ge de ni den yi de se de gun lo jan je sem ji gun ne la je yu sha be yu an cho ji ge ba se dan je ba de den yi dop cha ro and that in the shagging some jay, that's also shabby chido and a karjukewa, chicken juke, chicken saba in a chanju sim gomba in a dombanyo gomba in a karocom jet, nimbo top the shadow good water.
Whilst it's not explicitly stated in the verse, what is being referenced is the 4 opponent powers. So even where they are not explicitly stated, when one does the limb of confession, one should rely on all four opponent powers. And it's quite easy to do because one has already previously generated refuge and bodhicitta and imagining the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas surrounding oneself. So the power of the basis has already been generated. Here, through one's reflection, regret for past non-virtues is generated, and restraint, the promise not to continue, now one cultivates, because that is part of confession. Another way to translate the word confession is to admit. So when one admits something, one would like to think this comes with regret and restraint. So that is the meaning here, that when I confess, one is confessing from a basis of regret as well as a promise not to continue in this way. So there are already three of the four opponent powers, the basis, regret and restraint. And then the final opponent power, that of the antidote. As you know, this can be any virtuous activity. And it could be recitation of mantra, meditation on compassion or on emptiness, or whatever you are inclined to.
That in your mong, the diverse duty to Shada Dimusum that in a duty in Gore. That's all. The Shada Dimusum, the men are the diverse I married. Judaism men are diverse I married. Just and disum that in a diverse agore. The Shada Shedani, you are the Dimulate in Ungore, Dimu di Zavadita, the Dimotele. The Dimotela, you. Timo de la Mangoya, Lede la Mombe, Maripa, Sero, Maripa, Timo, Maripa, Lede, Manzu, you can is a machine by the Timus or machine by the Timus. That Dinalayam, Chigi Lede, Lenje, Namsha, Namashima, Gawachen, and Table Digion, but machine by Hamoa, the Hamoa, Corona, Timula, Gore. Diva Cheba and the Simjan Social Chebaina, Shengi Kua, the Simjan Social Diva Chebaina, the Diva in Bahamoa, the Hamoa, the Timure. Diva Jebalatin and Jebu, and the Chica, Mambana Dunga Jungu, but Dihamoa, the Timure, the Timulo Ramarava. Dina, that Timutela, Timuna, so the Rangi, Moa, Rashin, Ganishua by Bahamoa, Rashin, Demotuba Sinti, Tim Tinsin, that is all a chagor, that's also a chagor. Jesa, the Suge, Timu Tinsin said, tell a dinner, Timu Shanati. That Chunga to get the Leore. The Sukimo, the Solatine, the Shakia, now Contokia the Leore. And the Latina, Jugida, Chigi, Leka Chawadi, Lumagi Chawa Chedi, and Divatis, Licores, this more, just like the Negi and Zada, Juzo, Timudi, or that.
Without these three poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance, no non-virtue will be accumulated. And the very root of these is ignorance itself. Now, this word timuk for ignorance, it means whatever is not known. So it encompasses everything that we do not know. And here, specifically, it refers to being ignorant about karma, which means we are ignorant about what actually leads to desired states of happiness, what actually leads to suffering. In other words, what is virtuous and non-virtuous. But one can also include in this type of ignorance, timuk, one can also include ignorance about the nature of reality. So believing that things exist in the way that they appear. So in this way, we can say that from ignorance, including this type of ignorance, this ignorance of not knowing, all the afflictions arise, attachments and anger arise from ignorance.
On the net, that Dimudi Yoban, that Tinyomobati, the Yomo, Notriti, Chasandi, Yungurejua, the Dimudi, that Mabasa, La Pena, Chiki, he been Juda and Jebugi, but the Gudelatin and Tiwiki Yobati, Hamoana, Hamodi Timuti. Dine Hamoadi, that never can say or Elamna. How go ahead, some go ahead. How go ahead, how gonna, how more the mails or Penanga to be the Sabin, Denish Tabna, and the new Denish Kiri, didn't do the Ungres, but how Mogana, and no true sugar. She said, how gonna, and dinner how more some of those signs, how gonna, Jebu the point 7 tap new Jebu, Kin, Jebu, launch you had the Dunda Dugorwa. She said, how go ahead. She said, how more the Timuche. 디무디 매바 소야라 하고 해체베다 하고 해야 되고 봐. 제가 당한 저기 뒤지기 가서 풍부되게 아니 미다바 임바된 가서 하고 말 딱센서야 돼. 가서 기디나 교육이네 막 찍기디나 가사나 디레다서 무디네 다가라 교다가라 내려베게 삼로 딱센도 여러와 딩아서 딱센 디무로 채고 딱센네. 제가 디 매바 소야리아 먼저 삼문다디 파 제바제 오데네 가사디 디링이 두수 치세 끼지끼지 또 지네 교어루도 와서베 지루도 선베 삼다디 끼지끼지 지바디 또 선바나 세메게 하고 선바나 지바디 끼지끼 지바디 레샤 선베 세메게 바니소나 데네게 따와진베 따진디 요아메르와 디 따진 메나 따진 디게 연진네 너도 쉬어야 돼 요모바 예데 메데 디바사야 메르와 제가 디네자 저기 하모고야디 디묵세 제가 디 메바서발라 대단디 하고야디 다 메바서다 하고야기 탑람디데 제가 아주 너도 쉬어야 돼 내가 가나 내가 제단 마싱바지래야 모라다 마싱바지게 땅도는 저 동안요아이 뭐 강아제이 버와 제가 마싱바디 네 가르스네 장제 신와서서나 마싱데 메르와 제가 신바데 신나 신바디 당신나 된 땅도는 조서들 다다 자와지 투고 판도 투고로 와 제가 마싱바디 마싱바디기 기인지는 아주 내가 제베나 노트셔야디 강아제디 셰그로 와 제가 마싱바디 장도르제 신바제제 하고와지 지 내가 제베나 된 노트셔고 마딩아 종원숨데 아주 하고로 와 어디나신 당한 저기 유 개와 디바다 미다바 모스 디네 하고 봐나 아니 디르 디네 디바사 메디라 하 먹어 봐이나 텔레티네 안 자와지 디바사 디용고로 와 제가 디네게
From ignorance comes all our afflictions. Not knowing, being confused, being ignorant, from this leads to all our problems and difficulties. For example, if you sit behind the wheel of the car and decide, I'm going to drive it, but you have no idea how to drive, things will not go very well. And what is the solution? It's very obvious. The solution to not knowing something is to come to know it. One needs to learn how to drive a car, and then things will go somewhat better. So too in the context here, if one is ignorant about cause and effect, one needs to gather knowledge about cause and effect. And not merely knowledge or only knowledge, but one needs to think about that knowledge deeply so that it has a transformative impact on one's mind. So just like in any aspect of one's life, if there's something that one wants to do, one then knows perhaps about the results you want to achieve. So now you'll think about the causes required, the method that one needs to employ to gain a result. So therefore, if one wants a particular result, one needs to know the causes. Similarly, if one observes something, observes causes, if one knows what will result from that, you'll know if one wants to gather more of those causes or not. So therefore, we need to understand both causes and results, and understand them to a degree that they have an impact on our mind. But as mentioned earlier, this being ignorant about topics this ignorance is much broader than just cause and effect. In many categories, one can also say ignorance towards impermanence. Because a way of thinking, a natural way of thinking that causes us so many problems is our grasping at permanence, at believing that past events or past situations are unchanged. So this we need to reflect on deeply. And just because we recall something as being like that, it doesn't mean it is like that now. In fact, it will have changed in so many ways between then and now. When one thinks about subtle impermanence, reflecting on momentary change extensively, eventually giving rise to a valid cognition, realizing a subtle impermanence, one will be freed of this ignorance grasping at permanence. So therefore, back to our context here of cause and effect, by coming to understand the topic well and reflecting deeply on it, one will readily refrain from non-virtue and engage in accumulating virtue. This will become very natural to one. It will be easy to refrain from non-virtue, and one will readily, with ease, strive in virtue.
대량 아주 금세 삼다 제바체 야네야도 삼당바다 되네 아니 그 미다바시 도구로와 또 삼마다바지 제바 맞잖아 미다바디 미다바리 삼바삼기 지미다바리 람나야 당주 이게 donda ngomade kanba mitabare sambaine dabaine mitaba to thuya khaburwa sida mitaba sedi doyalya samnata kimjen samda chebache yane yando yane ya samda dinba chebache samda tengi ma ni shipchar sa cha ligro tameda jada di resha sambegida ta shube ngeba singe sobana mitaba se duwa sida denigi to sobane da dagzen se de samlo di ungo marwa demyungo mare dene ditirwa on dinashin da timuk densin de da chasho di timuk densin se cheza di da me ba dongbani do gore se de jeza semge nga zuge che tamjige rangshin gan신 ba pa ji rangshin jeba jeje pa ba gyumje samda jeba je yana ya gyumje samda jeba je de jeza nawa na she ngālai mātio bārāng ngōni dhūpa tā tsāwa kīne mīnduwa sāmbegi chīsāng tā chūtam chē shēn chīla tūne lū pā tā pā tsam kī shūyō bāchī mātō ngālai mātio rāng ngōni dhūpa tsāwa kīne mīnduwa sāmbegi tā chū bāchī hā goyā lā kō shimchū chē chē bāchī yumchē māngbō samdā chē yāne yāndō samdā tīne samdā kī tā mē tā chū lā tā tīne kī kāyā shēn lē mātio bā lū pā tā pā tsam māyēn bāchī tsāwa kīne mīnduwa sāmbegi ngē bāchī ngē bāchī samlite 동요도 동반이 또 봐시그로와 되니게 동요도 다 대신 나와나 신 최디 지금 랑wen의 주바진 팀이 된진데 매바 차서로와 진짜 매바산 니 견진에 다 되샤다 콩저다 근데 나게다 녀모베리티 제매바 차로라 그래서 녀모바기 유자의 호로 팀이 된지 호로 매바 차서로와 진짜 디 도시에 다 되니게 동반이 떠야 돼 미다바 떠야 돼 데니게 차사도시네 심주체 제바제 야네 야도 삼다 균제 삼다제 근데 도고에 차고로 와다
The challenge with a topic like impermanence is initially it seems kind of obvious, and therefore one thinks there's no need to really dwell on it much. But this is an error, because for a topic of the Dharma to have a radical impact on one's mind, one needs to think about it based on reasons and do so repeatedly over a sustained period. Without analysis on a topic, such as impermanence, one will never come to realize it. And for years one will just hear about it every now and again, but one will still not have realized it. And even merely repeating that, oh, things are impermanent, this will not transform how one lives one's life, how one experiences the world. For that, one needs to reflect based on reasons repeatedly over a sustained period. And with impermanence and the other topics too, one starts at a simple level, and in dependence on how well your meditation's going, how much merit one has and so forth, one goes at one's own speed deeper and deeper, coming to see ever more clearly how phenomena change momentarily. And as one engages in this meditation repeatedly over a sustained period and keeps what one has meditated on alive and fresh as one in one's mind as one goes about one's daily business, it will start to impact our grasping at permanence. It will start to weaken. We'll no longer expect things to be how they once were, or how they are now, that they will be like this in the future. Our grasping will weaken. The subtlest form of ignorance to come to realize is the ignorance of self-grasping. This, like the other analytical topics, to come to realize this, one needs to rely on reasons, not mere vocal repetition. One needs to meditate repeatedly over a sustained period using reasons. One starts, like with all the topics, at a coarser level, and the dependence on one's progress will move subtler, coming to first recognize how phenomena appear, or how a particular phenomenon appears to your mind, then investigating to see whether it exists in the way that it appears, seeing if it exists by way of its own innate essence or nature or characteristic, coming to see whether the way it appears, is that true or not. And one again and again will come to recognize it does not exist in the way it appears. It's empty of existing the way that it appears. And thereafter, one asks, so then how does it exist? And moving from emptiness, we move to dependent arising and recognize it exists merely labeled by mind. No phenomenon exists in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. But it does still exist, but only labeled by mind. Meditating like this again and again, using reasons repeatedly over a sustained period, keeping this meditation alive and vibrant in one's mind whilst one is going about one's daily activities. This then will lead to one's ignorance of self-grasping weakening. And thereby, the strength and frequency of the afflictions arising, that too will weaken. And eventually, one will eradicate the ignorance of self-grasping entirely through developing the wisdom realizing emptiness, the contrary mind. And at that point, when one is liberated from ignorance, one is liberated from the afflictions too.
That deeper sagre said and Gawa sagre Chasa did Ganjo Jiki Lujugone Diba Dangawin Diva Sa said and Lujugone Gawa Sangawin Gawa Sa said Chasa Nang Samlo Kunola Hali Gormado. Now some no kunonga and mevachila and the Lujugin Diva Sayad, Aganek, Diva Gavasade, Galhaburwa, Penang Zugi, Jiki Shing Lipa, Jilumru, Shuja, Jaro, Chungor, Dina, did Tadi, Gavaya Chai, Migawa Chai, Skaya, Marco, got Tanya Casore, Lumanero, Chagarua, Casane, Kunungi, Kuno Yomarwada, Merwa. Dina Shinga, Lugi, Chawachebadi. Gavare, Migavarelana, Daddy Kunola some died, or Kunola, Kunola, someone Shele Pene, Shinganzu Mishangela, Lapa Chishubena, Shuedi, Chishuba, the Tibarebe, Gavarelana, the Kunola some died, or Kunola Pembe, some Nataja, called the Kuakanga, the Diwaji, paying a try, call Pembe, Sambiga, some Taja, Chishudivena, did Jawa the Gavaro Chargurua. That call a nearby and chick some long, but newbie serious Sambi Kunela Shuena, Diva Chagro, just the Lakwe do Shuedi, Gava the Diva Sadi, Lugi Diva Sadi, Sadipa, Chikuno, Nanguno, Samla Rally Dua, Jesadi. Just not the Tawajeba, nearby Samla, there could Migawa Chas came into a bene, maybe Shanley, Pembe, Sambela, Ne, Dunga say, Pembe, some tade, Chikapu to the Tagore, Nugorwa. In the Carson could do just some more on Chasanki as a Yahoo some gore, Carson Pembe semi gulnet and Jeverwa. Diam Pembe some matajo penny, Sitsevis, Nebe, somebody and Diwabajic, Tus Jevene, Sera, Nazata Matavena, Lamsang Honla. Didn't I Savage and all the news was a corner. As a good Kunolia and the Tsevis, some Nebe, some of you, but teaching. She said, the needs are done on you. Manzu Gavada Miguel Kang Sas Messadi, so a similar rally, which is that number Sanyi Bigi, Manju Yamnaji Rimbatilla, Chisa Dunga, Gu Semre, Chisa Semdi, Yargetangore, Semdi, Migi, Nambi, Ritipa, Mevason, and Sampi Ritipa, more compared Tangore, said. Chisa that Ditawala, Nambi Rita, Sambi said, Namba de Carre, Sambo de Carre, the Dia Shimjuji Chebache, Dicheba, and Dijebu, and Yugarelate in the Yungudu, Jebu Ganesh Yungudu, Sebeke Samnotan and Yu, Decha Sheda, Dimugulate in Yuche, Dijebalatena, Samnodi, Digi, and Jebu Dunga Junga, Miguel, Mazu Moya, Disamnode, Papangure, said, 두신의 심주시지 하고 해다. 지난 저 셈을 라리고 지난 셈속에 당고를 해서지 지난 지름지 사다 가서 셈바사나 사다 람야사 람존남숨 여러 람자 삼바사나 사다 람야상 삼방안나 사다 람양안 탐제 삼바달라 라리소세 송고로와 지난 삼바상부 제네 군예라제 제베네 그 자와디 하고 중국이 해서지 삼방안배 군예라제 자와 제베네 두가 중국 지난 류가 제바 개와다 미고 저가 야도면서 저 삼을 라리고 해지 지난 삼바드 상부 제고 삼바디 아니 교화당 거서 참 이제 자주 셈 되네 마시 비기 문바디 세지는 유기 니송어 또 비기 로디 공고를 해서 장고에서 김센디로 와다.
This weekend we've spoken about actions of body, speech and mind a number of times. Amongst these three, mind is so important. So I want to talk a little about that to really emphasize to you your great individual responsibility to take responsibility for your own mind, to take care of your own mind in all situations. If we think of non-virtuous activities that are done with our bodies, or physical non-virtues, these require an afflicted mind, motivating them. Likewise, non-virtuous speech requires an afflicted mind, motivating it. So too, with wholesome physical activities, they require a wholesome mind, motivating that. So too with wholesome speech, that requires a wholesome mind to motivate that. So therefore, our body and speech follow our mind, they depend on our mind. And it's actually quite difficult to imagine the accumulation of virtue or non-virtue through physical or verbal behavior without it being motivated by the relevant mind. So for example, on a windy night, we can, if we're outside, we'll be aware of the movement of the wind, we'll feel the movement of the wind, and we'll hear the movement of the wind through objects. But no virtue or non-virtue is being created because there's no motivation behind that activity. So if one is engaging in harmful physical or verbal behavior, it depends so on the motivating mind. And if the virtue or non-virtue that is being created, if it is weak, middling or powerful, that in turn also depends not only on the motivating mind, but the strength of that motivating mind. And a particular activity, physical or verbal, many can be, the same activity can be either virtuous or non-virtuous. The activity or the speech, the physical activity or the speech could be the same, but the motivation is what determines whether it's virtuous or non-virtuous. So if you imagine, grasping someone with your hands and moving them violently, this would seem like an act of aggression. But it could also be an act of trying to save someone from falling off a precipice. The action is the same. The motivation is very different. Piercing someone's body with a sharp instrument, normally it sounds deeply unpleasant and would be non-virtuous, and it certainly could be if that were the motivation. But if it was a medical practitioner wanting to give a patient a healing injection, it would be virtuous. So the mind is primary in whether the activity, physical or verbal, is virtuous. So I encourage you with this to at all times take responsibility for your own mind, take care of your own mind. And then an additional way to think about this is when we observe or experience the physical or verbal behavior of others, because in general we innately know that the same activity or speech can be both wholesome or unwholesome, we impute a motivation onto that person. And in dependence on how we believe their motivation to be, we can see them as acting in an aggressive manner towards us or helping us. And this then is a topic that's worthy of quite some investigation. But to continue with what we've been looking at here, the cause of our resultant behavior is the three poisons. And if the resultant behavior stays mental, or if it is expressed verbally or physically, whether it is virtuous or non-virtuous depends on the motivating mind. So we need to come to understand this topic of cause and effect very well, so that we identify what is non-virtuous, as well as identifying that motivating mind, and thereby ensure that that motivating afflicted mind, we don't act under its influence, because we'll know it leads to the creation of causes for suffering. And thereby, we need to take care of our mind and ensure that it doesn't come under the influence of afflictions. If afflictions arise, that's okay, let them go. If afflictions arise, don't grasp at them. Don't believe that this act of attachment or aggression is justified. Rather, let the affliction go and generate a wholesome mind rather. Then Geshe quoted something from Rinpoche's three principal aspects of the path. It goes something like this. From a good heart or a wholesome mind follows wholesome paths of action. From a cold heart or a unwholesome heart follows unwholesome paths of action. So here, the Lama Tsongkhapa is expressing exactly the meaning of what I'm presenting here now. Our mind is so important. This is what we need to take care of, take responsibility for at all times.
Denike Gangara Shiki Kedu, Nusubiki Samataya, Dangazu Subokum Sedi, Jangdur Dadene, Jandur Chedu Kabla, Chizadangazu Gangaji Tedu Kabla, and Delia, and the Bishutangu, Dangajile, Gansu Malama, Chik Nueje, Chik Bango Society, Chibama, Jabdikala Bishdangurua, Chibamro, the Mango Chigurua, the Ma Jabdu Bijamata Shaban Trolarwa. The major Piston or Dinashing and the Subiki, the new comb gore setting and Sevalia, and Chig Dunga Nebala, Nebala Jimmy Seba, and Chig Dunga Dando Limbe Seba, and the Chulang saying Seba should be number some, Dinit Yor City, Sebi Namja Shed, the Chitu Diniti and Zuke, Dinig Samlia Chandorchi. Chizandi Chandorchi, Ganga Teddy Kapla, Ganga Chile, Shengi, Sawada Shelle, Shengi Rosula, Neobata, Dinigi, Chiki, and Lamsan Delia, Semachubache, deep patient Seba, patient to Hortagaje. Deep patient on the Niel and other Chandorche, Delia could be patient down to water. The Negi, Shelia, Robert Chair, that in Casso, Sosu, Nena, Ganga Teddy, saying, Aji, said, same Shum Shungro, Delia Seba, Dunga Seba, or the Niki. The guy Mardi, Legi Table, Yamazo to work a bit. Did Kuna dig to be the nigger say to what you went, just the nigger Capocoya, Savage come to watch Goyana. Just not that Shelia, Pembache about the Roger, the nigger Gangala Mats, but chickens and big sometimes. The Chulang is in Sebas. Dushin, some little tone, down some more Dushin, a Luluchida, Shala, Jamba, the Zero Sambata, and Shala, Tivi, Jamba, Chicken Bears, and Tsu Sambata, and the nigger. And she should be Yamlina and she give each out Jelly Deba that in the Tundu de Kivina, and she can do similar Lushi, the Uya de Chagorwa. She didn't remember some Nalia Benachic, a TV Samba, and she Choshe made the Dinigan, and some of the Kinjine, Manzula Kanga Mangushi Ligorwa. The nature of Sambala Changore said, 제자다 삼로딩 간주 가와도나 삼로딩 념도 두고요 바자 지게 가와도베네 당한주 삼로 념도 요요 바자 대 삼로디 야고치 셰도베나 가와도 되리베네 당한주 가와도베네 간주 디기도 요요 바 차에 책으로 어쨌든 디자다 디 삼로 잡아나 간주 삼로디 치네 엔게와 치마도베네 지게 대 개와 침이 띠엔데래 삼로도 두고로와 지난 디 띠엔데래 디기 두야기 용 녀야 용고로와 되네서 다소 셈러라려 고래서 지난 디징아 저기 최고 부야당 되네게 디버샤야라 소부두시나 삼당다 두수수 삼당 고래서 삼당다 랩고로와 당한줄 두시나 저기 두시나 삼당 검시세 고래서 하디 두스로와다
Wholesome minds, virtuous minds, such as love, compassion, contentment, patience. These minds, we need to spend time on cultivating them in our meditation. And whilst going about our daily activity, call them to mind and have them present as much as one can. Because their mere presence keeps our mind at ease, joyful and peaceful. So if we think, to take a very different analogy, if we think of every country has its army and their armaments production, and so these armies will have well-stocked storehouses of weapons, which are, where things are going well, covered in dust, and maybe their best before date is rapidly approaching, and then they have to be disposed of. So this is hopefully what happens with most nations' armies. But where this illustration is relevant for us, how armies prepare themselves, or rather militaries prepare themselves, is that they prepare their skill base for a later time of danger. Then, should danger come, they are ready. And that's the approach that we should take. In particular, if we think of patience. The concept of patience sounds very nice, but at the time we need it, we may struggle to rely on it. And that's not a fault of the concept of patience, but it just means our training is insufficient. Because to rely on patience in the face of danger, we can only rely on our patience then if we have cultivated it well before. So there are the threefold classification of patience. That relating to harm from others, so those external to us. The patience of willingly accepting hardship, so whatever mental turmoil is arising within. As well as the patience relating to challenges in our Dharma practice. So whichever of all these three types, the patience is similar, but they relate to different sources, external, internal, or the practice of the Dharma. But if we have trained well prior to facing adversity, in particular in love, compassion, and wisdom, then our patience will be well developed. When we face adversity, and we become aware of adversity arising within us, we'll readily be able to apply patience. And patience is the expression of our prior training in love, compassion, and wisdom. And then we'll be like a well-trained soldier who's got all the right armaments to deal with that adversity. And you will face no danger. Your own afflictions will not be able to overwhelm you and harm you. So therefore, whilst things are relatively okay in your life, use this opportunity not to engage solely in frivolous activities, but train your mind. Train your mind with commitment, cultivating good qualities, and thereby weakening unwholesome minds. Because life will become challenging again. And if one has used the opportunity when things are going a bit better, one can skillfully deal with challenges and thereby preventing them even from becoming challenges. And I also want to encourage you that when you engaging in meditation repeatedly over a sustained period, cultivating the same topic, don't leave what you've cultivated on the meditation cushion. Bring it to mind throughout your day. Because whenever virtue arises in your mind is more at ease, it's more peaceful. You'll recognize this within yourself. You'll recognize that your mind is becoming more loving and compassionate, and the way you're engaging with others, that too is more loving and compassionate. And also another mind, Geshe mentioned a few times, was contentment, to train in these. So that as one is going about one's daily life, when one meets situations that previously you would have found challenging, because of your training in good qualities such as love, compassion, patience, wisdom, contentment, when one meets these situations, you will not even notice them as challenges. You will not experience them as challenges. This will come about through repeated training on your cushion, but then bringing that to life throughout the day. Then you'll be able to, wherever you go, whatever you are doing, whatever you're encountering, your mind will be at ease. Your mind will be comfortable with whatever circumstances you find yourself in. And whomever you are with, you'll feel a closeness to them, a warmth towards them. You'll always feel or find yourself surrounded by friends. And these qualities of mind that are developed through meditation, remember the synonym for meditation, habituation, when these virtuous minds are becoming habits, so that they dominate one's very personality, one's very being, they will accompany us on life's journey, wherever it takes us in this life, and they'll accompany us as we move into the next life. So thank you. Then we'll conclude there for this weekend. Thank you very much.